Clara Whitmore slammed her father's debt notice on the courthouse steps and didn't cry. Not once. She folded that paper into her pocket, walked straight through the front door, looked the man. Everyone called a worthless drifter, dead in the eyes, and said, "I'll marry you." Not because she loved him. Not even because she trusted him. Because the wolves were at the door, and this cowboy was the only one standing between her family and ruin. If you're new here, subscribe, hit that notification bell, and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's begin. The morning of June 14th, 1887. Clara Whitmore woke before sunrise the way she always did, because someone had to. Her father, Thomas Whitmore, had not been able to rise on his own for 6 weeks. Not since the accident in the East Field left his leg broken in 2 places and his pride shattered in more. He was 51 years old, and he had the eyes of a man who had already started saying goodbye, not to life, but to everything he had spent his life building. Clara tied her apron at the back without looking down. She had done it so many times her fingers knew the knot by themselves. She started the fire, put the kettle on, and stared out the small kitchen window at the land her grandfather had cleared with his own hands. 22 acres. That was all Thomas Whitmore had left, and in 4 days they would lose that too. The letter had come from Dawson and Hargrove Land Holdings 3 weeks ago. Crisp paper, clean ink language so polite, it almost hid the violence of the message. Due to the outstanding debt of $2,040 and failure to meet the agreed payment schedule, Whitmore Farm will be subject to legal repossession effective June 18, 1887. Clara had read the letter 4 times. Then she set it on the table. Then she picked it up and read it again, as though the words might change. They didn't. She went into her father's room that evening and sat on the edge of his bed. He was awake, but staring at the ceiling. "Papa," she said quietly. He didn't answer for a long moment. Then he said, "I know. We have 4 days." "I know, Clara." "Is there anyone we haven't asked?" she said. "The bank, the Morrison brothers, Pastor Hale, anyone." Thomas closed his eyes. "I asked everyone worth asking 2 months ago. Nobody lends money to a man who can't stand up." She wanted to argue. She wanted to tell him that wasn't true, that people were good, that someone in Willow Creek would step forward. But she had been to the bank herself alone without telling her father, and she had sat across from Gerald Hicks in his starched collar and heard the words that still burned in her chest. "Miss Whitmore, your family's account is already overdrawn. We cannot extend further credit to a household with no active income source and no collateral beyond the land itself, which, as you know, is already tied to the existing debt." She had walked out of that bank with her chin up and her jaw tight, and she had not cried until she reached the alley behind the general store where nobody could see her. Clara didn't cry easily. That was something people said about her, and she had never been sure whether it was a compliment or a warning. "Then we pack," Thomas said quietly. "We pack and we go to your Aunt Ruth's in Abilene. We start over." "I'm not leaving this land," Clara said. Her father opened his eyes and looked at her, then really looked at her. "Clara, I am not leaving this land, Papa." Her voice was calm, absolute. "You built this. Mama is buried in the east corner. We are not leaving." Thomas looked at his daughter for a long time. He reached out and took her hand. His grip was still strong, even if the rest of him had gone quiet. "Then I don't know what else to do," he said. "And that is the hardest thing I've ever said in my life." She heard about James Callahan the next afternoon at Doris Pierce's dry goods store. She hadn't gone there for gossip. She had gone to settle the last of an old account and buy a few days' worth of flour. But Doris Pierce was a woman who treated conversation the way some people treated breathing, constantly and without much thinking about it. "You hear about the Callahan man?" Doris said, wrapping the flour without looking up. "No," Clara said. "Came back to town last night, stayed at the Resting Horse, paid cash, which surprised Walt Hennessy near to death because you know how that man looks." Doris set down the package and lowered her voice conspiratorially. "Ragged coat, boots falling apart, hat so old you can't tell the original color, but paid cash. Walt said it was real money too, not counterfeit." Who is James Callahan? Clara asked. Mountain man, drifter some say. Others say he owns a little plot of land somewhere out west of here, but nobody's ever seen it. He comes through Willow Creek, maybe once a year, buys supplies, doesn't talk to anybody, and leaves. Strange sort. Not dangerous, just— Doris waved her hand. Closed up, like a locked box. Clara picked up her package. Why are you telling me this? Doris looked at her steadily. Because I heard he's looking for a wife. The words landed oddly in the store, like something dropped on a wooden floor. Looking for a wife, Clara repeated. That's what Walt said he told him. Said he's got land, needs someone practical beside him, and doesn't have time for courtship. Doris folded her arms. I'm not saying you should consider it, Clara. Lord knows I'd never push a woman toward a man she doesn't know. But you've got 4 days and no money, and sometimes life doesn't give you good choices, just choices. Clara paid for the flour, said goodbye, and walked back to the farm. She didn't say a word to her father that evening. But she lay awake all night thinking. She found him the next morning. How was at the far end of the feedlot, loading burlap sacks of grain onto a wagon with the steady, unhurried efficiency of a man who had been doing physical labor his entire life. He wasn't tall, just over average, but there was a solidness to him, a kind of density, like a fence post that had been driven deep into ground and wasn't going anywhere. His coat was exactly as Doris had described, worn through at both elbows. His hat had a crease in the brim that looked like it had been sat on more than once. Clara stood 6 feet away and said, Are you James Callahan? He stopped lifting, looked at her. His eyes were a pale, clear gray, and they were considerably more alert than the rest of him suggested. Yes, he said. My name is Clara Whitmore. I heard you're looking for a wife. He set the sack down slowly. He didn't look embarrassed or surprised. He looked like a man calculating something. Who told you that? The whole town is going to know by tomorrow morning, she said flatly. Small town, that's how it works. What do you want, Miss Whitmore? I want to know if it's true, she said. And if it is, I want to know what you're offering because I may be in a position to have a conversation. He looked at her for a long time. Not rudely, more like he was deciding something. Then he said, Let's sit. There was a low fence rail nearby. They both sat on it 6 inches apart, and Clara thought briefly that this was perhaps the strangest conversation she would ever have in her life. I'm not looking for love, James said. I want to be plain about that from the start. I'm not offering it, Clara said. What are your terms? Something moved in his face. Not quite a smile, more like acknowledgement. I have land that needs managing. Not just a house, a whole property. I need someone who can run a household, keep books, deal with workers, and hold things together when I'm out on the range. In return, you'll have a home and income security, and no debt. Clara kept her voice steady. My father has a debt of $2,040. If I agree, that debt would need to be cleared. Before the wedding. James didn't flinch. How many days do you have? 3. He nodded once. If we come to an agreement this morning, the money can be to Dawson and Hargrove by end of day. Clara felt something lurch inside her chest, relief and fear arriving at the same moment, so tangled together she couldn't separate them. You have $2,000 available in cash right now. Yes. She stared at him. The worn coat, the battered hat, the quiet certainty in his gray eyes. How? That's my business, he said. Not unkindly, just final. She looked at her own hands. 23 years old, standing on the edge of something she hadn't chosen and couldn't refuse. What if I'm unhappy? She asked quietly. What if this isn't what either of us expects? I'm not asking for your happiness, Miss Whitmore. I'm asking for your commitment. There's a difference. He paused. But I'll tell you this, I've never treated a person badly in my life, and I don't intend to start. She believed him. She couldn't explain why. She just did. If I agree, she said slowly, my father stays on his farm. The deed stays in Whitmore's name. James looked at her. That wasn't part of what I said. I know, she said. I'm adding it. A silence settled between them. A long one. Then James said, Done. They were married 2 days later at the Willow Creek Courthouse. The room held 8 people. The justice of the peace. 2 witnesses pulled off the street. Doris Pierce, who had heard about it and come uninvited, but brought flowers, which Clara accepted because they were the only flowers. Her father, who had managed to get himself into a clean shirt and borrow a crutch, and whose face held an expression Clara had never seen on him before, a complicated mixture of gratitude and grief, and something that looked almost like apology, and Clara Whitmore, and James Callahan. They said their vows the way 2 people agree to a business arrangement, clearly without performance. James didn't look at the justice of the peace when he spoke. He looked at Clara, and Clara looked back. She had told herself she would feel nothing, that this was a transaction, that she was not the kind of woman who needed to feel something at her own wedding to make it real. She had been wrong about that. She felt a great deal. She felt the weight of what she was walking away from. She felt the strangeness of standing beside a man she had known for 48 hours. She felt the unsettling calm of a decision she could not take back. And underneath all of that, quieter and stranger than anything else, she felt the smallest, most reluctant flicker of something she could not name. Not love. Nothing that dramatic. Just recognition. Like looking at a locked door and wondering what was on the other side. Afterward, on the courthouse steps, the few townspeople who had gathered, because in a small town, word traveled faster than horses, watched Clara climb into James Callahan's wagon with her single trunk of belongings. She heard them talking. She wasn't supposed to, but she did. "Poor girl," said a woman she recognized as Margaret Sutter. "Married a drifter to escape poverty. She traded one bad situation for another. He paid that debt right enough," said another voice. "But where'd he get it from? Man who dresses like that doesn't have $2,000 sitting around without some kind of trouble behind it." "She could have waited," said a third voice. "She's young. She's smart. She didn't have to throw herself away like this." Clara kept her eyes on the road ahead. James sat beside her on the wagon bench, completely silent, his hands loose on the reins. After a few minutes, without turning to look at her, he said quietly, "People talk." "I know," she said. "Does it bother you?" She considered being dishonest. She decided against it. "Yes," she said. "Some." He nodded as though that was a fair answer. "It gets quieter," he said, "when you stop being close enough to hear them." They rode for a while in silence. The town fell away behind them. The road became rougher, less traveled, winding west through country she had never crossed before. "How far is it?" Clara asked after a time. James looked ahead. "A while," he said. It was not a reassuring answer. But Clara had made her choice. So she settled her hands in her lap, kept her back straight, and watched the world change around her. They traveled for 3 hours without stopping. Clara had expected perhaps an hour, maybe an hour and a half. When the 2-hour mark passed and James showed no sign of slowing the wagon, she began to wonder. "You said you had land," she said carefully. "I do." "Nearby land." "Land that's mine," he said. Not evasively, more as if the question didn't quite make sense to him. "How many acres?" she asked. He was quiet for a moment. "Enough," he said. She turned to look at him fully. "Mr. Callahan, I agreed to this arrangement in good faith. I think I'm owed honest answers to reasonable questions." James glanced at her sideways. There was something in his expression, not discomfort exactly, more like a man choosing his next step very carefully. "You'll see everything when we arrive," he said. "There are things I'd rather show you than describe." "Why?" "Because descriptions can be doubted, seeing can't." She wanted to push. Every instinct told her to push. But something about the way he said it stopped her. Not the words, the tone. A quiet, absolute confidence that had nothing to do with arrogance. The tone of a man who knew exactly what was waiting at the end of this road and was entirely certain of what she would think when she saw it. That certainty made her more nervous, not less. The afternoon light was turning orange when James pulled the wagon to a halt at the top of a long ridge. He set the brake, wrapped the reins, and stepped down. Then he turned and offered his hand to help her down the first time he had offered it. Clara took it. His hand was rough, calloused in specific places, the way a working man's hands always were. but the grip was careful, deliberate. She stood on the ridge and looked out. Below the ridge, stretching further in every direction than her eyes could properly comprehend, was something she had no framework to understand. Not a cabin, not a small farm, not a modest property. It was a valley, enormous, private, cut off from the rest of the world by ridgelines on three sides. And filling that valley, organized with a precision and scale she had never seen outside of the paintings in the Willow Creek schoolhouse that showed great estates back east, was a ranch. A real ranch. Not a homestead, not a small operation. Structures, corrals, outbuildings. Workers moving in the distance. Cattle, hundreds of them, moving in the far fields like a slow brown tide. Clara stood very still. Her mind was doing something she rarely let it do. It was refusing to process what her eyes were seeing, because what her eyes were seeing contradicted everything she had been told, everything she had assumed, everything she had agreed to. "What is this?" she said. Her voice came out very quiet, almost careful. "Home," James said simply. She turned and looked at him. The worn coat, the broken-down boots, the battered hat, and those calm gray eyes watching her with an expression she still couldn't quite read. Patient, steady, waiting for a reaction he had clearly anticipated. "This is yours," she said. "Yes." "All of it?" "Yes." "How many acres?" He paused. 8,000, give or take. The number went through her like a current. 8,000. She had grown up on 22. She had married a man she thought owned nothing, and she was standing at the edge of an empire. "You let me think," she started. "I let everyone think," he said quietly. "Not just you." "Why?" He looked out over the valley for a moment. When he looked back at her, something had shifted in his face. Not open. James Callahan did not do open, but less closed. A door pulled halfway instead of all the way. "Because a man with nothing is ignored," he said. "And a man ignored can protect what he has." Clara stared at him. Her heart was doing something complicated that she didn't entirely understand. "I want the full truth," she said. "Not now necessarily, but eventually. All of it." James studied her for a moment. Then he nodded one firm, deliberate nod. "That's fair," he said. He climbed back into the wagon. She climbed up after him. And as they descended the ridge toward the most impossible thing she had ever seen in her life, Clara Whitmore now. Clara Callahan understood with sudden absolute clarity that she had made a bargain she didn't fully understand, and that the man sitting beside her knew a great deal more than he had told her, and that she had married him anyway. She pressed her hands flat against her thighs to keep them still. She was not afraid. She was for the first time in months something close to alive. The main house was bigger than the courthouse where they had married. Clara did not let herself react when they pulled up to it. She had used up her visible reactions on the ridge. Whatever her face showed now, she had no control over it, so she decided to show nothing and see what happened. A man came out to take the horses, young, maybe 17, with a broad, honest face. He glanced at Clara once, then looked at James with something that looked like question. "This is Mrs. Callahan," James said, stepping down. "She runs the house from here forward, whatever she needs." The boy nodded quickly. "Yes, sir." Clara stepped down on her own. "What's your name?" she asked the boy. He looked surprised to be asked. "Danny, ma'am. Danny Ortega." "Thank you, Danny," she said. "How many horses are we stabling tonight?" Danny blinked. 14 in the main stable, ma'am. 2 more in the east pen." "And who manages stable accounts?" Another blink. He looked at James, uncertain. "She's asking you," James said. "Old Henry Briggs, ma'am. He keeps the log." "I'll need to sit with Henry tomorrow morning," Clara said. "Would you let him know?" "Yes, ma'am." She picked up her own trunk and carried it toward the front door. James fell into step beside her, and she noticed, though she didn't comment, that he watched her with that same careful, measuring expression, as if he was observing an experiment. The inside of the house was not what she expected. She had braced herself for either luxury or mess, and found instead something harder to categorize. Large rooms, good solid furniture, Everything functional, nothing decorative. No curtains, no rugs in the main hall. As if someone had built a space for living in, but hadn't quite gotten around to making it a home. A woman appeared from the back of the house, mid-40s, compact and purposeful, with dark hair pulled back tightly. She looked at Clara with direct, unimpressed assessment. "This is May," James said. "She manages the kitchen and household." "Managed," May said flatly. "Now apparently I'll be answering to the new Mrs. Callahan." She folded her arms. "No offense. None taken," Clara said. "I'm not here to change what works. I'm here to learn what doesn't. Can you show me the household ledgers?" May uncrossed her arms very slightly. "Tonight? Is there a better time?" A pause. Then May said, "I'll put them on the kitchen table." James said nothing through any of this. But when Clara glanced at him briefly, she caught something crossing his face, fast gone almost immediately. It took her a moment to recognize it. It was relief, not satisfaction, not amusement. Relief. The kind that comes when you have been waiting a long time for something you were not sure would arrive, and it finally does. She filed that away, said nothing, followed May to the kitchen. That first night, Clara sat at the kitchen table until past midnight, with the household ledgers open in front of her. A lamp burned beside her. The house quieted down around her workers returning to their quarters. May banking the kitchen fire and going to bed with a last look at Clara that was somewhere between respect and resentment. Clara read everything. The cattle counts, the feed records, the payroll, the land tax assessments. And somewhere around 11 o'clock, she turned a page and found something that made her stop. A set of entries recorded in a handwriting different from the rest of the ledger. Tighter, more deliberate, totaling a series of payments going out each month to an address in Austin. The entries were labeled simply consulting fees, except the amounts were irregular, not the steady monthly draw of a consultant. Spikes, jumps, followed by quiet stretches, then another spike, and the most recent entry dated just 6 weeks ago was the largest of all. $400. To a company called Blackwell Resource Holdings. Clara sat back in her chair. She looked at the name for a long time. Then she folded the ledger page back into place, closed the book, and sat very still in the lamplight. She didn't know yet what it meant, but she knew it meant something, and she knew with the particular instinct of a woman who had spent her whole life managing more than anyone gave her credit for, that she had just found the first thread of a knot that was going to take everything she had to untangle. She put her hand flat on the cover of the ledger. "I see you," she thought. "I don't know what you are yet, but I see you." She blew out the lamp. She went to bed, and James Callahan in the room down the hall lay awake, listening to the sounds of his house, his strange, enormous secret house, and tried to remember the last time someone had sat down with the ledgers before he had told them to. He couldn't think of one. He stared at the ceiling for a long time. Then he closed his eyes. And for the first time in a very long while, he slept without dreaming of wolves at the gate. The next morning, Clara was up before James. She knew, because she heard no movement in the hall, no boots on the wood floor, none of the sounds that a man makes when he is awake and moving through a house. The ranch outside was already stirring. She could hear voices in the distance, the low protest of cattle, the rhythmic clank of something metal being worked, but the house itself was quiet. She dressed without lighting the lamp, found the kitchen, built the fire herself before May appeared, which seemed to catch the older woman off guard in a way she covered quickly with a neutral expression. "You don't have to do that," May said. "I know," Clara said. "I wanted to." May poured water into the kettle without another word. But something had shifted between them, small and fragile, as a new thread, and Clara felt it. She sat at the kitchen table with the ledger again. Not the household accounts this time, she had already memorized those. She wanted the ranch operating records. She asked May where they were kept. May looked at her steadily. "Mr. Callahan keeps those in the study. Second door on the left. I don't know if he's given you permission. He told Danny Ortega last night that I run the house from here forward," Clara said. "I'm going to assume that extends to understanding what the house is running." A pause. Then May said, Second door on the left. The study was exactly what she had expected from the rest of the house. Functional. Dense. Every surface covered with something purposeful. Maps, livestock records, correspondence, supply orders. A man's room, but not a careless man. A careful one. A man who kept track of things. She found the operating ledger on the desk already open, as though someone had been reading it recently. She sat down and started from the beginning. She had been reading for perhaps 20 minutes when she heard the door behind her. "You're in my study," James said. She didn't look up. "You gave me authority over the house." "The house, not the study. The ranch operates out of this study," she said. "If I'm to be useful to you, I need to understand the operation. Unless you'd rather I just manage curtains and dinner menus." A pause. She kept her eyes on the ledger. She heard him move one step, then another, and then he was standing beside the desk, looking down at what she was reading. "What do you want to know?" he said. She looked up at him then. He was dressed for a working day better coat than yesterday, but still the same quality of deliberate plainness. His hair was damp. He had shaved. He looked, she thought, like a man who took care of himself quietly and without audience. "Blackwell Resource Holdings," she said. $400, 6 weeks ago. What is it?" The air in the room changed. It was subtle. James Callahan was not a man who wore his reactions on the outside, but something in him went very still. The particular stillness of a person who has been watching a horizon carefully and has just seen something appear on it. "Where did you see that?" he said. "Household ledger, filed under consulting fees. The handwriting is different from the rest of the entries, tighter, more controlled. Someone who knew what they were hiding was adding it to an existing record." She kept her voice even. "Someone on this ranch is paying Blackwell Resource Holdings and logging it as consulting fees, so it doesn't look like what it is." "What is it, James?" Howe was quiet for a long moment. Long enough that she thought he might simply refuse to answer. Then he pulled the chair from the corner of the room, set it beside the desk, and sat down. "Blackwell is a man named Richard Blackwell," he said. "He runs a land acquisition company out of Austin. Buys up properties, develops the resources, underneath them oil, minerals, water rights. Makes a great deal of money doing it." "And he wants this land," Clara said. "He's wanted it for 4 years." James laced his hands together on his knee. "This valley sits on top of one of the largest untapped mineral deposits in the state. Oil, most likely. Maybe more. Blackwell found out about it before I did. He had a geological survey done on surrounding land about 5 years ago, and the results pointed straight here." "And he approached you?" 3 times. In person, through lawyers, and through intermediaries." James's jaw tightened. "I told him no 3 times. And then my father died," he said. 8 months ago. He left the ranch to me, which Blackwell knew would happen because he'd been watching this family for years. And a ranch that transfers ownership is a ranch that can be challenged. Contested wills, disputed boundaries, false contracts. There are a dozen ways a man with enough money and enough lawyers can tangle up an inheritance until the rightful owner runs out of resources to fight. Clara looked at him. "And the payment in the ledger. The $400 going to Blackwell's company." James met her eyes. "That's what I've been trying to figure out for 6 weeks, he said. "Someone on this ranch is on his payroll. I don't know who. I don't know exactly what they're providing. But I know that money is going out, which means information is coming into Blackwell. About me. About the ranch. About everything." Clara sat back slowly. Her mind was moving fast now, assembling pieces, testing them against each other. "You knew about this entry before I found it?" "Yes." "And you didn't remove it. You left it in the ledger?" "Yes." "Because you wanted whoever put it there to think you hadn't noticed?" James looked at her for a long time. "Yes," he said quietly. "That's why you needed someone," she said. Not to him, to herself, working it through aloud. "Not just to manage the house. You needed someone who could move through this ranch without raising alarm. Look at things. Notice things. Someone who would have a natural reason to be in the books and the accounts talking to workers." She stopped, looked at him directly. "Is that why you married me?" she asked. The question sat between them like a stone dropped in still water. James did not look away. Partly, he said. The word hit harder than a long answer would have. Partly. Clean. Honest. Brutal. And the other part? Clara asked. He was quiet for a moment. You walked up to a stranger you'd never met and negotiated for your father's farm before you negotiated for yourself, he said. I'd been watching people fail under pressure my whole life. I needed someone who didn't. Clara held very still. She could feel the anger, real anger, not performance, sitting at the base of her throat. She had the right to it. He had used her. He had let her walk into this marriage believing one thing, and it had been something else entirely. But she was also, and this she admitted to herself with extreme reluctance, not entirely surprised. She had known on some level that the locked box had a reason to be locked. She just hadn't known the shape of what was inside it. If I'm going to help you, she said carefully, and I am not yet saying I will, but if I am, I need everything. Not pieces, not what you decide I need to know, everything. James looked at her. Why? Because I can't fight something I can't see the whole shape of, she said. And because if you're trusting me enough to be in this room, you need to trust me enough to be in this conversation. He studied her for a long moment. His gray eyes were unreadable in the way of deep water, not empty, but too full to see the bottom of. Then he said, There's a man on this ranch named Hector Graves. He runs the east section, 15 years with my father. Loyal, or so everyone believes. 3 weeks ago, I was in the East Corral before dawn. I heard him talking to a rider I didn't recognize. The rider left before I could get close, but I heard Hector say a name. Blackwell, Clara said. Blackwell, James confirmed. The silence that followed was the kind that comes after something important lands, and both people are deciding what to do with it. Does Hector know you heard him? Clara asked. No. Is he dangerous? James considered. Hector is not a violent man. He's a practical one. He took Blackwell's money because Blackwell offered it, and Hector has a family to feed. That's the kind of person who is very useful to an enemy because they don't act out of malice. They act out of need, which makes them harder to predict and harder to confront. Clara stood up. She closed the ledger. She set it back exactly where she had found it. I'm going to talk to May this morning, she said, and Henry Briggs, and Danny Ortega. I'm going to spend the next few days learning every person on this ranch, not who you think they are, but who they actually are. I won't confront Hector. I won't do anything visible, but I will watch, and I will listen. And when I know enough, we will talk again. James looked up at her from his chair. She was standing, and he was sitting, and something about the geometry of it felt significant. You're not angry, he said. It wasn't quite a question. I am very angry, Clara said calmly. I just don't have time for it yet. She left the study. Behind her, James Callahan sat alone in a room full of maps and ledgers, and the specific kind of silence that comes when a man realizes for the first time that he may not be carrying his burden alone anymore. He was not sure in that moment whether that was a relief or a new kind of fear. He decided it was both. He got up, put on his hat, and went out to the range. The day had begun. By noon, Clara had spoken to 11 people. She had done it carefully, the way a person navigates ice testing each step, distributing her weight, never committing fully until she was sure of the surface. She asked questions that seemed routine, about the house, about the ranch schedules, about where supplies came from and how orders were placed and who authorized what. She listened to what people said, but more importantly, she listened to what they didn't say. The small hesitations, the redirected answers, the moments where a person's eyes went somewhere before their words did. She found Henry Briggs in the north stable, exactly where Danny had said he would be. He was a compact, weathered man of about 60, with hands that had known decades of work and eyes that had known decades of watching. He looked at Clara the way an experienced hand looks at a new manager with professional neutrality that covered imperfectly an active assessment. Mrs. Callahan, he said. Mr. Briggs, she said. I hear you keep the stable accounts. Have for 12 years. Good records. Complete records, he said. There was a distinction in his voice that she caught. "Show me," she said. He did. They sat together for an hour, going through feed costs, horse schedules, equipment purchases. Henry Briggs was precise, thorough, and honest in his record-keeping. He was also, she could feel it, curious about her in a way that went beyond simple interest in the boss's new wife. He kept watching her the way you watch something you haven't categorized yet. Near the end of the hour, she said without looking up from the page. "Do you trust everyone on this ranch, Mr. Briggs?" The pause was brief but real. "I trust most people to do what's in their interest," he said carefully. "That's different from trusting them." She looked up. "Do you trust Hector Graves?" Henry Briggs went very still. Just for a second. Just long enough. "Hector's been here longer than most," he said. "That's not what I asked." He looked at her for a long moment. Something moved behind his eyes, a decision forming. "6 weeks ago," he said slowly, "I saw a rider come through the east gate after dark. I didn't know the man. I mentioned it to Hector in the morning because East Gate is his section, and he's the one who should have logged a visitor. He said it was a supply man who'd gotten turned around. Did you believe him? I've been around long enough to know what a supply man's horse looks like," Henry said. And that wasn't a supply man's horse. Clara closed the account book. "If anything else comes through the East Gate that seems wrong to you, I'd like you to let me know, quietly, not through anyone else, directly to me." Henry looked at her steadily. "Does Mr. Callahan know you're asking this?" "Mr. Callahan and I are on the same side," she said. "That's all you need to know." Another pause. Then Henry Briggs nodded once. Short and definitive, the way a man agrees to something he's been waiting to agree to for a while. "All right," he said. She thanked him and left. She found May in the kitchen just before the midday meal, overseeing 2 other women who were preparing food for the ranch workers. She waited until the other women had gone out, then said, "May, how long have you been here?" 11 years, May said without turning from the stove. "And in 11 years have you ever taken money from anyone but Mr. Callahan's family?" May turned then. Fast. Her eyes were sharp and hot. "Excuse me." "I'm not accusing you," Clara said evenly. "I'm asking. There's a difference." The sharp heat in May's eyes shifted slightly. She read people well. Clara could see that she had the instincts of a woman who had survived a long time in other people's houses. She was reading Clara now, looking for deception, for agenda. "No," May said finally. "Never." "Have you ever seen someone on this ranch take money from an outside source?" May was quiet for a long moment. Then she set down the spoon she was holding and turned to face Clara fully. 3 months ago," she said, "I was going out to the east barn before breakfast to check on a sick colt. Early, barely light. I saw Hector Graves talking to a man in the yard. Hector had something in his hand, a paper and envelope, I couldn't tell which. The other man handed him something. I didn't stay to watch." "Why didn't you tell Mr. Callahan?" May's jaw tightened. "Because Hector's been here since before James's father died, and because I wasn't sure what I saw, and because—" She stopped. "Because I didn't want to be wrong about a person I'd worked alongside for 15 years. Clara looked at her. "I understand that," she said, and she meant it. "But I need you to understand something. If this goes where I think it's going, being slow to act costs more than being wrong." May held her gaze for a long, searching moment. Then she said quietly, "What do you need from me? Tell me everything you know about who comes and goes from this ranch. Riders, visitors, supply men, anyone who arrives and you don't recognize. And don't tell anyone we've had this conversation." May picked up her spoon again. "I have eyes," she said simply. "I've always had eyes. I just didn't know who was worth using them for." She turned back to the stove. Clara walked out of the kitchen and stood in the hallway for a moment, not moving. Her heart was beating fast. Not from fear, from the specific, focused clarity that comes when pieces begin to align. She had been on this ranch for less than 24 hours. She already had 2 allies, a confirmed suspect, and the beginning of a picture she hadn't been given, but had assembled herself. She thought of James out on the range, carrying this alone for 6 weeks. She thought of Blackwell in Austin, believing he was maneuvering against a man who didn't know he was being maneuvered against. She straightened her back, went back to work. James came in from the range at dusk. He found Clara at the kitchen table again, this time with both the household ledger and the operating accounts open side by side. There were notes in her own handwriting on a separate sheet of paper. He stood in the doorway and looked at what she had built in a single day and felt something that was entirely new to him and that he was not prepared for. "Sit down," she said without looking up. "I have things to tell you." He sat. She told him about Henry Briggs, about the unlogged rider at the East Gate, about May's account of the early morning exchange. She told him precisely, without editorializing, presenting the information, the way a person presents evidence clearly in sequence, letting the weight of it speak for itself. James listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "You got all of this today," he said. "People are generally willing to talk when they feel seen," Clara said. "And when they've been carrying something they wanted to put down." He looked at her. She looked back. "What else?" he said. He could tell there was more. She slid the sheet of notes across the table to him. On it were 2 columns, dates and amounts that she had cross-referenced between the household ledger and the operating accounts. The Blackwell payments lined up precisely with dates that corresponded to specific entries in the operating ledger. Entries that tracked cattle movement to the eastern boundary. "Every time cattle are moved to the east section," Clara said, "there's a payment to Blackwell within 2 weeks. The amounts vary, but the pattern doesn't. Hector is telling Blackwell when the eastern boundary is unattended." James looked at the columns. Something cold moved through his expression. Not anger. Something older and harder than anger. Recognition. "He's telling Blackwell when to have his surveyors on my land," he said. "Without your cattle and workers moving through that section, Blackwell's people can access the eastern ridge," Clara said, "where I imagine the clearest evidence of what's under this land is accessible." James put the paper down flat on the table. His hand stayed on it for a moment. "He's been surveying my land without my knowledge or permission," he said quietly. "Building a legal case for what's down there, so that when he makes his move through the courts, through false contracts, through whatever mechanism he's planning, he already has documentation that I don't have." "That's what I think," Clara said. "Which means time matters. Whatever he's planning, he's been building to it. He may be close." James looked at her. "What do we do?" The question surprised her, not that he asked it, but the way he asked it. Openly. Directly. Without the careful, measured quality that characterized everything else he said. He asked it the way a man asks who genuinely wants the other person's answer. Not confirmation. An answer. Clara picked up her pen. "First, we stop the bleeding. The East Gate gets an additional lock tomorrow, and you change the cattle rotation schedule. Hector needs to see normal, so we don't tip him off. But we make the eastern boundary inaccessible on a schedule he can't predict." "Agreed," James said. "Second, I need to see whatever legal documents relate to this land. Deed boundary surveys, your father's will. All of it. If Blackwell is building a paper case, we need to know exactly what that case could look like. I have everything in the study. I need to see it tonight." "All right. Third," she paused, set the pen down. "You need to tell me the rest of it." James looked at her. "The rest of what?" "The rest of what you're hiding." She kept her voice level, not accusing, certain. "I've been in your books, James. I've talked to your people. I can see the shape of what you've told me, and the gaps of what you haven't. There's something about your father's death you haven't said. There's something about Blackwell that's older and more personal than 4 years of land disputes. And whatever it is, I need to know it, because it's in the room every time you say his name, and your jaw does that thing it does." James went very still. Clara waited. Outside, the ranch had gone quiet for the night. The fire in the kitchen had burned down to low coals. The lamplight between them was warm and small against all the dark outside the windows. "My father and Blackwell knew each other," James said at last. The words came out slow, like stones lifted from deep water. "Before I was born. They started out in the same town in the hill country. They were friends for a time. Then Blackwell found an opportunity to acquire land that my grandfather owned, bought up the debt, forced a sale. My grandfather lost the farm he'd built. My father spent 20 years after that building something new. This ranch." He stopped. Blackwell waited. "He waited for your father to die," Clara said. "He came to the funeral," James said. "Stood in the back. I saw him. He caught me looking and he didn't flinch. He just looked back. And I knew then exactly what was coming." Clara absorbed this. "He's not just after the minerals," she said. "No," James said. "He's after the proof that one Callahan couldn't hold what another Callahan built. That's what he wants. To take this and prove that it was never really ours to keep." She looked at him for a long time, at the tight line of his jaw, at the controlled, careful stillness of a man who had been carrying a very old weight for a very long time. "It was yours," she said. "And it will stay yours." She said it quietly, not dramatically, the same way she'd told her father she wasn't leaving the farm. Absolute, grounded in something deeper than feeling. James looked at her across the table. In the lamplight, his face was harder to read than ever, and yet for just a moment she caught something underneath all that careful control. Something that looked very briefly like a man who had been alone a long time and had just heard a voice he recognized. He looked away first. "The study," he said. "I'll get the documents." He pushed back from the table, walked down the hall. Clara gathered her notes, capped her pen, and followed. They worked until well past midnight side by side, the documents spread between them. She read. He explained. She asked questions, and he answered them fully, without the careful pauses she had grown accustomed to. Something had opened. Not much. Just enough. Near the end, she found a boundary survey from 12 years ago, the one her father-in-law had commissioned when the ranch was expanded. She spread it out and studied the eastern ridge marking. Then she went back to the most recent Blackwell payment and calculated the time window. She sat back. "He's already done 3 surveys," she said. "Maybe 4, on your land, with your employee feeding him access dates." "Yes, and he's going to use that geological data to claim legal right to resource extraction through an eminent domain argument," she said. "He'll claim the resource is so significant and so broadly beneficial that a private landowner cannot be allowed to sit on it. He'll have the surveys, he'll have the documentation, and he'll have lawyers who specialize in exactly this kind of case." James looked at her. "How do you know about eminent domain?" "My father lost a road dispute to the county when I was 15, she said. "I read every document in that case. I learned that the difference between losing and winning is usually whether the person fighting has read more carefully than the person they're fighting." James was quiet. Then he said, "What do we do about the surveys he already has?" Clara looked at the boundary map, traced the eastern ridge with her finger. "We get our own surveys done," she said. "Legitimate, dated, recorded with the county courthouse. If he has documentation of what's under this land, we need documentation that was filed before his, or that contradicts his findings, or both. And we need it fast. I know a geologist in San Antonio." "Can he be trusted?" James considered. "His name is Arthur Webb. He was my father's friend, not Blackwell's." "Contact him tomorrow morning," Clara said. "Tell him it's urgent. Tell him everything. He'll ask questions." "Let him," Clara said. "We need someone asking the right questions on our side." James nodded. He rolled the survey map back up carefully, set it aside, looked across at Clara. "You've been married to me for 36 hours, he said. "Approximately," she said. "You've reorganized my household staff, built an intelligence network out of my cook and my stable manager, identified a spy, mapped a legal threat, and outlined a counterattack strategy." Clara looked at him steadily. "Yes." "Is there anything you can't do?" he said. It wasn't quite a joke. It wasn't quite not one either. "I can't cook," she said. "May has made that very clear." Something crossed James Callahan's face that was unmistakably almost a smile. It was small and brief and gone almost immediately. But it was real. "Get some sleep," he said. "Tomorrow is going to be a long day." She gathered her notes and left the study. In the hallway, she leaned against the wall for just a moment. Her legs were tired. Her mind was running at a pace that was going to make sleep difficult. She thought about the man in that study, the hidden ranch, the hidden wealth, the hidden grief, the very carefully hidden heart. She thought about what he had said. Partly. That honest, brutal single word. She thought about what she had said. It was yours. And it will stay yours. She hadn't planned to say that. It had come from somewhere below planning. She pushed off the wall, walked to her room. 36 hours, she thought. She had married a stranger, discovered an empire, uncovered a conspiracy, and found out that the lonely man she'd bargained with at a fence rail was carrying a wound that went back a generation. She had not cried once. She was not going to start now. She lay down on the bed, fully dressed, and closed her eyes. Her last thought before exhaustion finally took her was of the eastern ridge on the survey map. The boundary. The line that Blackwell had been crossing quietly in the dark for months. Not anymore, she thought. Then she slept. Arthur Webb arrived on a Thursday. Clara knew he was coming before James told her, because she had been watching the road since Monday, the way a person watches something they are both waiting for and dreading, knowing that its arrival marks the point where everything becomes real in a way it wasn't before. Webb was older than she had imagined. 60, maybe more, with the kind of lean, unhurried precision that belongs to men who have spent their careers measuring things that don't move and thinking about things that take centuries to form. He shook James's hand the way old friends do not. With warmth, exactly, but with the specific gravity of people who have known each other through things that matter. He looked at Clara and said, "You must be the new Mrs. Callahan." "I am," she said. "James tells me you found the ledger entries." "James tells you more than I expected," she said. Webb almost smiled. "He trusts very few people, Mrs. Callahan. The fact that he called me means he trusts you." He glanced at James. "Which is saying something considerable." James said nothing, which Clara had learned was his version of agreement. They sat in the study, all three of them, and Webb laid out what James had told him over the wire and what he already knew from his own work in the region. He had, it turned out, done geological survey work on neighboring properties 5 years ago. He knew exactly what the eastern ridge of Callahan land sat above. "It's not just oil," Webb said. He put his hand flat on the desk, the way a man does when he wants what he's saying to feel solid. "There are silver deposits in the eastern strata. Not surface-level deep, but accessible with the right equipment. Combined with the oil reserves underneath the valley floor, you are sitting on one of the most valuable undeveloped properties in the state of Texas, possibly in the Southwest." James absorbed this without visible reaction. Clara did not. "How much are we talking about?" she said. "Conservatively." Webb looked at her directly. "Multiple millions, over decades of extraction." The number sat in the room like a third person. Clara looked at James. He was looking at the desk. His jaw was set in the way she had come to recognize not anger, but the controlled suppression of something large. "Blackwell knows this," James said. It wasn't a question. "Blackwell almost certainly has better numbers than I'm giving you," Webb said. "His people have been on your land. I'm giving you educated estimates. He has actual samples." "Then we're behind," Clara said. "In documentation, yes," Webb said. "But not necessarily in time. The kind of legal maneuver Blackwell is likely planning, eminent domain challenge or a fraudulent easement claim. Those take months to file properly. The question is whether he's already started filing or whether he's still in the preparation stage." "How do we find out?" Clara asked. "County courthouse," Webb said immediately. "Austin land records. Any filing that names this property will be a matter of public record once submitted. The problem is that if he's filed anything in the last 2 weeks, it may not yet have been indexed and made searchable." "So we need someone at the courthouse," Clara said. "Someone you trust," Webb confirmed. Clara looked at James. "Do you have a lawyer?" "My father's lawyer," James said. "Solomon Ware, out of San Antonio." "Is he good?" "He's honest," James said. "In my experience, that's rarer and more valuable." "Contact him today," Clara said. "Tell him to go to the Austin Land Records office in person. Not by wire, in person. And tell him to look for anything filed by Blackwell Resource Holdings, or any affiliated entity against this property in the last 90 days. James was already standing. I'll send the wire now. He left the study. Webb looked at Clara with an expression that had moved past assessment into something closer to straightforward respect. He's been carrying this alone since his father's funeral, Webb said quietly. I know, Clara said. He's not built for asking for help. I know that too, she said. Which is why I didn't wait to be asked. Webb looked at her for a moment. Then he said, What do you need from me? I need you to do a legitimate survey of the Eastern Ridge, she said. Documented, witnessed, dated, and filed at the county courthouse before Blackwell can do anything about it. Can you start today? I can start this afternoon, he said. Take Danny Ortega with you as a witness. He's reliable, and he doesn't ask unnecessary questions. And Mr. Webb, she paused. Do not go through the east gate. Use the north access. Hector Graves manages the east section, and we are not ready for him to know what we're doing. Webb's eyebrows went up slightly. You've been here less than a week. 4 days, she said. He shook his head slowly. God help Blackwell, he said. She found Hector Graves that afternoon. She hadn't planned to confront him. She had planned to continue watching, continue gathering, continue building the case from the outside in. But she came around the corner of the east barn at 2 o'clock and walked directly into him, and the collision, literal, ungraceful. Both of them, catching their balance, left them standing 3 feet apart with nowhere to go. Hector Graves was a big man. Broad-shouldered, dark-haired, with the weathered look of someone who had spent 15 years outdoors and hadn't minded. His eyes were brown and at this moment startled. Mrs. Callahan, he said. Mr. Graves, she said. She had her balance back. Her voice was level. Just the person. I've been going through the livestock rotation schedules, and I noticed the east section has been running a different pattern than the others. Can you walk me through the reasoning? She watched him. She watched his eyes, his hands, the set of his shoulders. She watched for the thing that people do when they've been asked a question. They weren't prepared for the half-second of internal recalculation before the answer comes. She saw it. Small. Real. East section has different grazing patterns, Hector said. Ground's softer near the ridge. We rotate the cattle less frequently to avoid churn. How frequently? She asked. Every 3 weeks roughly. And when the cattle aren't in the east section, who's working that ground? Another pause. Fractionally longer than the first. Nobody much, he said. It's boundary territory. Not a lot to manage when cattle aren't present. So it's essentially unattended for stretches of 2 to 3 weeks at a time, Clara said. On a regular, predictable schedule. The pause. This time was a full beat. His eyes, she noticed, did not move, didn't flick to the side the way a nervous person's do, didn't drop. He held her gaze with the deliberate steadiness of a man working very hard to appear unworried. Suppose that's true, he said carefully. Something wrong with that? I'm not sure yet, Clara said pleasantly. I'm still learning the operation. Thank you, Mr. Graves. She walked away. Her heart was beating hard. Not fear adrenaline. The specific, focused kind that comes when you have walked up to something dangerous and touched it lightly and walked away before it moved. He knew that she knew. She was almost certain of it. Not the specific details, not how much, but the fact of being looked at by someone who was looking for exactly the thing he was hiding that registered. She had seen it in the careful way he'd held her gaze. Too careful. The effort of a man performing calm. The question now was what he would do with it. She went straight to James. She found him coming in from the north field. She didn't wait for him to dismount. She walked up to the horse and looked up at him and said quietly and fast, I spoke to Hector. I didn't plan to, it was accidental. But I asked him about the east rotation and he knows I was fishing. He's going to contact Blackwell. James swung down from the horse in one motion. His face had gone absolutely still. When? Today. Tonight at the latest. He'll find a way to get a message out. She was already thinking through it. Which means Blackwell will know we're moving. He may accelerate whatever he's planning. How much time do we have? I don't know. Days maybe. possibly less. She met his eyes. We need Solomon Ware to move faster. And we need that survey from Webb filed before the week is out. James turned toward the stable. I'll ride to the telegraph office myself. James. He stopped. She said, there's something else. When Blackwell accelerates, he won't just use legal channels. A man who's been planning this for 4 years and suddenly feels the ground shifting under him, he'll use whatever he has. That includes Hector, and it may include things more direct than paperwork. James looked at her for a long moment. You think he'll send someone? I think we should be ready for it, she said. Not afraid. Ready. He held her gaze. Something moved through his expression that she couldn't quite name, some combination of urgency, and underneath it, something that had nothing to do with Blackwell. Something directed entirely at her. Stay inside tonight, he said. I wasn't planning to go wandering, she said. Clara. The sound of her first name in his voice, no Miss Whitmore, no Mrs. Callahan. Just Clara stopped her more completely than anything else could have. He said it with a directness that was almost startling from a man who measured every word. Be careful. She looked at him. You too, she said. He rode out to the telegraph office. She went back inside and told May to lock the kitchen door after dark. The wire from Solomon Ware came the next morning. James read it first, standing in the study, and Clara watched his face change as he read. She had come to know his face over the previous afternoon. He had found indexed and filed 11 days ago a petition filed by Blackwell Resource Holdings against Callahan Ridge Ranch. The petition claimed that geological surveys conducted on adjacent and neighboring properties indicated significant mineral deposits underlying land currently held by the Callahan estate. The petition requested a hearing on public resource access rights to be conducted before a circuit judge and proposed a compensated transfer of resource extraction rights from private to commercial ownership. The hearing was scheduled for 31 days from filing date, which meant they had 20 days. Clara set the wire down. The number was running through her head like cold water. 20 days to build a legal defense against 4 years of preparation. 20 days against a man who had lawyers and surveys, and a bought employee, and the specific advantage of someone who had been planning while the other side had been living. He filed before I even got here, James said. His voice was quiet, controlled. But there was something underneath it, a rawness that the control was working hard to cover. Yes, Clara said. He was never trying to make a deal, James said. He was waiting until the estate transferred to me. A new owner, no established legal representation, a property in the middle of mourning. He thought I'd have no time to prepare. I was right about the timing, Clara said. He was wrong about the preparation. James looked at her. 20 days, Clara. I know. Against a man with more lawyers than I have workers. I know that too. She picked up the wire again, reading it a second time. But Solomon Ware is good. You said so yourself. And Webb's survey, if he finishes today and files tomorrow, gives us documentation that predates Blackwell's petition in terms of local record. That matters. It shows we knew what was here and made no move to exploit it, which undermines his argument that private ownership is incompatible with public benefit. James sat down. He pressed both hands flat on the desk, the way he did when he was thinking hard and needed the solidity of something under him. What else? He said. Hector Graves, Clara said. We need to deal with him before Blackwell uses him at the hearing. If Blackwell calls him as a witness, someone with 15 years on this property who can testify to the cattle patterns, the unattended boundary, the access that's damaging. You want to confront him. I want to offer him a choice, she said, before Blackwell does it for him. James looked up. Explain. Hector is not a villain, she said. He's a man who needed money and took it from the wrong source. If Blackwell calls him to that hearing, Hector becomes part of a public legal proceeding that could destroy both this ranch and him. But if we go to Hector first, if we show him that we know what he did, and that we're not going to the sheriff, but that we need him to make it right, he may choose differently. He may also warn Blackwell immediately, James said. He may, she acknowledged. That's the risk. But Hector has a family in this valley. His wife's people are from here. His children go to school in Willow Creek. Blackwell wins this hearing, gets resource extraction rights, and this valley becomes a mining operation. Hector's family doesn't survive that any better than yours does." She paused. He may not have thought it all the way through. James was quiet for a long time. He was looking at the desk. She waited because she had learned that James Callahan's silences were not empty. They were full of something working. "I'll talk to him," James said. "I want to be there," Clara said. He looked at her. "He'll listen better with both of us," she said. "You're the authority. I'm the one who already looked him in the eye yesterday and didn't destroy him. That combination matters." A beat. Then James said, "This afternoon." "This afternoon," she agreed. They found Hector Graves in the East Barn, exactly where he should have been doing exactly what he should have been doing. He looked up when they came in together, and something moved across his face, a flash of something that was gone before it fully formed, replaced by a careful, watchful neutrality. "Mr. Callahan," he said. His eyes moved briefly to Clara, then back. "Ma'am." James stopped 6 feet away. He didn't move closer. He didn't fold his arms, or set his jaw, or do any of the things a man does to perform authority. He just stood, and the quietness of him, the absolute unhurried stillness, was more commanding than anything louder would have been. "Hector," he said, "I'm going to tell you what I know, and then I'm going to give you time to think. That's all I'm asking right now." Hector held very still. "I know about the rider at the East Gate," James said. "I know about the money. I know about Blackwell." He paused. "I've known about the ledger entries for 6 weeks. The color in Hector's face shifted, not drained, but changed the way a man's does when the thing he has been dreading arrives and is somehow both worse and easier than the waiting. His jaw moved once. He didn't speak. "I'm not here to fire you," James said. "And I'm not going to the sheriff. What I am going to tell you is that Blackwell filed a petition at the Austin courthouse 11 days ago. A legal action to take resource extraction rights from this land. The hearing is in 20 days. And if he wins, this valley is not a ranch anymore. It's a mine." Something cracked in Hector's face then. Small, but real. "He told me it was just a business negotiation," Hector said. His voice came out rough. "He said he was trying to reach a fair deal with you, and you were being unreasonable. That he just needed information about the land, the rotation schedules, the boundary patterns, so he could make a proper assessment. He said it wouldn't hurt anyone." "He lied to you," Clara said, quietly, without judgment, just fact. Hector looked at her. His eyes were working hard. "My youngest boy has a medical debt," he said. "Almost $300. I didn't know how." He stopped. His throat moved. He said $400, cash, no questions. The silence that followed was heavy with the specific sadness of a person who made a wrong choice for a real reason and is now sitting inside the consequences. "I understand," James said. And the way he said it was not performance. It was the voice of a man who had watched his own father fight with limited resources and knew exactly how desperation changes the math on a decision. Hector looked at the ground. "What do you need from me?" he said. James looked at Clara. "We need a written statement," Clara said. "Signed and witnessed, documenting what Blackwell asked you, what you provided, and the payment you received. We need it before the end of this week." "You're going to use it at the hearing," Hector said. "We're going to give Solomon Ware the ability to demonstrate that Blackwell's case was built on improperly obtained information," Clara said. "That doesn't just weaken his petition, it potentially subjects him to legal liability for the methods he used." Hector looked at James. "And the boy's debt," James said without hesitating. "The ranch will cover it, Bill." Hector closed his eyes, just for a moment. When he opened them, they were wet at the edges, not crying, but close. The specific expression of a man who has been carrying something that was too heavy and has just been allowed to set it down. "I'm sorry, James," he said. "I'm sorry about your father. And I'm sorry for this." James held his gaze steadily. "Make the statement," he said. "That's how you fix it." The next 10 days moved at a pace that Clara would later struggle to describe. It was not the speed of panic. Panic was scattered, wasteful, full of noise. This was the opposite. focused, compressed. The speed of people who know exactly what they are doing and exactly how much time they have and don't waste a second of either. Solomon Ware arrived at the ranch on day 6. He was a small, meticulous man with wire-rimmed glasses and the particular organized intensity of a lawyer who had spent his career fighting uphill and had won more often than people expected. He shook Clara's hand the first morning and said, "James tells me you're the one who found the ledger entry." "Yes," she said. "And that you coordinated the counter-survey." "Yes." "And that you turned a hostile witness into a cooperative one." "Hector turned himself," she said. "We just gave him the right information at the right time." Solomon looked at her over his glasses. "Have you considered the law, Mrs. Callahan?" Despite everything, she almost laughed. They worked at the kitchen table, which had become in the space of 10 days, something between a war room and a library. Maps, surveys, ledgers, legal precedents that Solomon pulled from his case files, and Clara's own notes, which Solomon read with an attention that made her think he was memorizing them. Webb's survey had been filed at the county courthouse 8 days ago. The documentation was solid, coordinates methodology. 2 witnesses, including Danny Ortega, whose signature was clear and legible and real. Against Blackwell's surveys conducted without authorization on private land and compiled using information obtained from a paid informant, Webb's report represented the legitimate record. "The eminent domain argument is weak," Solomon said on day 7, spreading documents across the table. "Eminent domain requires a public benefit that cannot be achieved any other way. Blackwell's petition frames this as a matter of public resource access, but Texas law requires that the property owner be demonstrably unwilling to develop the resource themselves, not merely that a commercial entity wants to develop it faster." "So we demonstrate willingness," Clara said. Solomon looked at her sharply. "Explain." "James files his own development intent with the county," she said. "A plan, even a preliminary one, to assess and responsibly develop the mineral resources on this land in partnership with the workers and families who live on it. It doesn't have to be fully built out. It just has to exist and be on record. It removes the core premise of Blackwell's argument." Solomon was quiet for a moment. Then he looked at James. "Can you put together a reasonable preliminary development plan in the next 8 days? "I know a man in San Antonio who runs ethical resource operations," James said. "He's been asking me for years about this land." "Contact him today," Solomon said. "Already thinking it," James said. Clara looked at the two of them, the lawyer and the rancher, both moving now with the kind of coordinated urgency that comes when a plan begins to take real shape. She felt something she hadn't let herself feel since this started, because there hadn't been room for it. Something that was not confidence. Exactly confidence was too soft a word. More like the specific feeling of a person who has been running toward something very hard and can finally see the outline of it clearly enough to know exactly where to hit. On day 9, the delivery came. It arrived by messenger from Austin, a sealed envelope addressed to James Callahan, marked with the return insignia of a law firm Clara didn't recognize. James opened it at the kitchen table with Clara and Solomon present. Inside was a letter. From Richard Blackwell. Not from his lawyers. From Blackwell himself. Clara read it over James's shoulder. The letter was polite. Formally, carefully polite, the kind of politeness that is a thin coat of paint over something very different. It acknowledged that James was aware of the pending petition. It expressed what it called regret that a legal process had become necessary. And then it made an offer. Blackwell would withdraw the petition entirely, the letter said, in exchange for a 20-year resource extraction lease on the eastern section of Callahan Ridge Ranch. James would retain ownership of the land. Blackwell's company would handle all development costs. James would receive 15% of net extraction revenue. 15%. Of what Solomon had already estimated could be multiple millions. Clara read the letter once, twice. Then she set it down and looked at James. His face was doing the thing she had come to know, absolute external stillness over something that was not still at all. "He's scared," she said. Solomon looked up. "I agree. This letter means his lawyers have told him the petition is weaker than he thought. He's offering a deal because he doesn't trust his case anymore." 15%, James said. The words came out flat. Of his projected revenue, Clara said. Which means he keeps 85% of what's under your land on a 20-year lease, while you carry all the risk of what a mining operation does to your property and your workers and your valley. James looked at the letter. He thinks I'll take it because 20 days isn't enough time and I'm desperate. He thought that 6 weeks ago when he filed, Clara said. He doesn't know what the last 10 days have looked like. A silence. Then James picked up the letter, folded it with precision, and set it aside. No, he said. One word. Clean and final as a gate closing. Solomon exhaled slowly. Then we finish preparing. We finish preparing, James said. He looked at Clara. She looked back. Something passed between them. Not a plan, not strategy, not the transactional language they had been operating in for 10 days. Something else. Something quieter and more complicated and more real than anything that had been said out loud between them. She looked away first this time. I'll get more coffee, she said. She stood up, walked to the kitchen, and stood at the counter for a moment, with her hands wrapped around an empty cup, facing away from both of them. She was 31 days into a marriage she had walked into like a business transaction. She was standing in the middle of a fight she had not been recruited for, but had built herself piece by piece, person by person, because the alternative was watching something worth fighting for get taken by a man who thought no one would stand up. She thought about her father on his farm, about the letter from Dawson and Hargrove, about the way she had walked into the courthouse and said, I'll marry you, to a man she'd never met. She thought about what James had said that first morning. I needed someone who didn't fail under pressure. She thought about what she had not said back then, but was thinking very clearly now. Neither did I. She filled the coffee, went back to the table. Solomon was already talking. James was already listening. The documents were spread between them like a map of a battle not yet fought. 10 days. They had 10 days. She sat down, picked up her pen, and got back to work. The morning of the hearing. Clara woke at 4 o'clock and didn't try to go back to sleep. She lay in the dark for exactly 3 minutes, listening to the ranch breathe around her, the distant cattle, the wind moving through the valley, the particular silence of a house full of people who were all she suspected doing exactly what she was doing. Lying awake, waiting. Then she got up, dressed, and went to the kitchen. James was already there. I was sitting at the table with a cup of coffee. He hadn't touched both hands, wrapped around it, staring at nothing in particular. He looked up when she came in. Neither of them said anything for a moment. There was nothing that needed saying. They had said everything over 10 days of preparation, and what was left now was not words. Clara poured herself coffee, sat across from him, and wrapped her own hands around the cup. Solomon is confident, she said. I know, James said. Webb's documentation is solid. Hector's statement is signed and witnessed. The development intent filing went through 4 days ago. I know all of that, James said quietly. She looked at him. Then what is it? I was quiet for a moment. His jaw moved. Then he said, my father built this for 30 years. 30 years of work, of decisions, of getting up before dawn and going to bed after dark. He did it for me. And he stopped. I let Blackwell get close enough to file a petition. I was so focused on not showing weakness that I didn't see what was happening in my own east section. You couldn't have predicted Hector, Clara said. I should have been paying closer attention. James. She waited until he looked at her. You were grieving. You lost your father 8 months ago, and you were running an 8,000-acre operation alone, and a predator with 4 years of preparation was circling you. The fact that you held it together long enough to still have something to fight for is not a failure. He looked at her across the table. The lamplight was low. Outside, the ranch was beginning to stir. She could hear Danny in the stable yard, the first of the workers starting their day. You didn't know any of that when you agreed to marry me, James said. No, she said. I didn't. You thought you were marrying a drifter with $2,000 in a cabin somewhere. I thought I was making a survival decision, she said, which is what it was, for both of us. She paused. But survival decisions have a way of becoming something else when you're not paying attention. James held her gaze. Something in his expression was doing the thing it had been doing more frequently over the past 10 days, moving toward openness, then pulling back, then moving again. Like a man standing at the edge of something cold and deciding whether to step in. "Clara," he said. "Don't," she said gently. He stopped. "Not today," she said. "Today, we go to the hearing. Today, we finish this. Whatever you want to say it when Blackwell is behind us and not in front of us. Because I want to hear it properly, not with a courthouse clock running." James looked at her for a long moment. Then something in his face settled, not closed, not the old careful blankness, but something quieter. A decision made and set aside for the right time. "All right," he said. He picked up his coffee, finally drank it. "Solomon wants to leave by 7, Clara said. "I'll be ready," he said. She nodded. She stood. She took her cup to the window and looked out at the dark valley, the land she had come to know in a month, the way she had known her father's 22 acres in a lifetime. The scale was different. The feeling she realized was not. This was home. She didn't know exactly when that had happened. She suspected it had happened the first night when she opened the ledger and put her hand on it and thought, "I see you." When had claimed something as hers to protect. She drank her coffee. 7 o'clock came fast. The courthouse in the county seat was 3 hours by wagon. Solomon rode with them, going over documents with a focus that seemed impervious to road conditions, the movement of the wagon, or anything happening outside the papers in his hands. Clara had a folder of her own notes on her lap. James drove. They didn't talk much. The kind of quiet that settles between people who have run out of preparation and are now simply moving toward the thing they've prepared for. "An hour outside the county seat," James said without turning from the road. "I want you to know something." Clara looked at him. "When this is over, either way, the farm stays in your father's name. The debt is cleared regardless of today. That was the agreement, and it holds whether we win or lose." He kept his eyes on the road. "I want that said out loud and witnessed." Solomon looked up from his papers. "I know that," Clara said. "I know you know it," James said. "I wanted Solomon to hear it." She looked at his profile, the set of his jaw. The particular way he held himself when he was saying something important and trying to make it sound like something ordinary. "Witnessed," Solomon said quietly, and went back to his papers. Clara faced forward. The road unspooled ahead of them. She did not say what she was thinking, which was that the man sitting beside her had just in the most understated possible way told her that whatever happened today, she was not collateral damage, that she had never been. She had known that for a while. It meant more to hear it said. The courtroom was smaller than Clara had expected, and fuller than she had hoped. Richard Blackwell was already there when they arrived, seated at the petitioner's table with 2 lawyers flanking him and a third man behind him who looked like a specialist of some kind. Blackwell himself was exactly what she had imagined, and nothing like what she had imagined simultaneously. Medium height, well-dressed without being showy, silver-haired, clear-eyed, with the specific expression of a man who has sat in many rooms like this one and won in most of them. He looked at James when they came in. James looked back. Neither of them spoke. The air between them in that moment was not hostile exactly. It was older than hostility. It was the weight of a story that started before either of them was born and had been running ever since. Clara looked at Blackwell steadily as she took her seat. He let his eyes move to her, briefly assessed her in the way powerful men assess women they have not been warned about, quickly, dismissively moving on. She noted it, filed it, said nothing. Solomon spread his documents on the table with methodical efficiency. Clara arranged her notes beside his. On the other side of the room, Blackwell's lead lawyer, a large, assured man named Garrett Cole, who Solomon had told them won 14 of the last 16 mineral rights cases. He had argued, shuffled his own papers with the relaxed ease of someone who expected today to be routine. The circuit judge came in at 9 o'clock sharp. Judge Elias Marsh. 60 direct, with the look of a man who had heard every variety of argument and was interested in evidence and uninterested in theater. We're here on the petition of Blackwell Resource Holdings against Callahan Ridge Ranch, Judge Marsh said, settling his glasses. I've reviewed the submitted documents from both parties. Mr. Cole, you may open. Garrett Cole stood. He was good. Clara acknowledged that immediately. He laid out Blackwell's case with a clean, logical efficiency that made it sound not like an assault on private property, but like a reasonable public interest matter. The geological surveys, which he entered into evidence with practiced ease. The extent of the mineral deposits. The argument that private ownership was functionally blocking access to resources that could benefit the entire region. I was 15 minutes into it when he introduced the first survey. Solomon leaned toward Clara and murmured, "Dated 8 months ago. That's 1 month after the elder Callahan died." Clara wrote a single word on her notepad. Waiting. She passed it to Solomon. He read it, nodded fractionally, and wrote back, "Exactly what I'll say," Cole continued. He was thorough. He cited precedents. He spoke with the confident cadence of a man building a structure he trusted completely. Clara listened to every word, tracking each claim against what she knew, checking it against the documents in front of her, noting where the gaps were not in what he said, but in what he didn't. He did not mention the method by which his surveys had been conducted. He did not mention Hector Graves. He did not mention that every date on those surveys corresponded with suspicious precision to specific windows in the Callahan cattle rotation schedule. When Cole sat down, Judge Marsh looked at Solomon. "Mr. Ware." Solomon stood. He was not as physically commanding as Cole. He didn't have Cole's practiced boom. What he had was precision, the specific quiet devastation of a man who has read more carefully than the other side assumed. "Your Honor," Solomon said, "the petitioner has presented geological surveys as the foundation of their claim. I would like to begin by examining how those surveys were obtained." Cole shifted. Almost imperceptibly, but Clara caught it. Solomon entered Hector's signed statement into evidence. Read the relevant sections aloud. The dates. The access windows. The money. The name Blackwell Resource Holdings, written in Hector's own hand, in a statement that Hector had signed in front of 2 witnesses 1 week ago. The courtroom was quiet. Judge Marsh looked at the statement for a long moment. Then he looked at Cole. "Counselor, your surveys were conducted on private property during windows of access, coordinated by a paid informant employed by the property owner." Cole stood. "Your Honor, the geological surveys were conducted on land you did not have permission to access," Judge Marsh said, "using information purchased from a man who had no authority to sell it. That is not a minor procedural irregularity, Mr. Cole. Continue, Mr. Ware." Something cracked in the room at that moment. Not loudly, not theatrically. The way ice cracks a sound that is small but signals something much larger beginning to give way. Clara felt it. She saw Solomon feel it. She looked at James beside her and saw something move through his face, not triumph, something more careful than triumph. The look of a man watching a thing he has been bracing against for a very long time finally begin to fall. Blackwell across the room had not moved. His face was controlled, but his hands, Clara noticed, had changed position on the table. Both of them flat, now pressed down, where before they had been loose. "The hands of a man steadying himself," Solomon continued. He entered Webb's survey, legitimate dated witness filed before Blackwell's petition reached the courthouse. He presented the development intent filing. James had submitted 8 days ago, demonstrating that the property owner had every intention of responsibly developing his own resources. He cited the legal precedent that eminent domain resource claims required a demonstrated unwillingness on the part of the property owner, and argued clearly and calmly that no such unwillingness existed or could be demonstrated. Then he did the thing Clara had suggested 4 days ago, sitting at the kitchen table at 11 at night, when they were all exhausted and running on determination and coffee. He called Clara to testify. She had not told James he was going to call her. She had been afraid he would argue against it, and she didn't have time for that argument. She walked to the witness chair and sat down and looked at Solomon. He asked her to identify herself. She did. "Mrs. Callahan," Solomon said, "in the course of reviewing the financial records of Callahan Ridge Ranch, "What did you discover regarding payments made to Blackwell Resource Holdings?" She told them, clearly, specifically, in sequence. The household ledger entries labeled as consulting fees. The irregular payment pattern spikes corresponding to specific dates. The cross-reference she had made with the cattle rotation schedules. The way each payment from the Callahan accounts to Blackwell lined up within days with a documented window when the eastern boundary was unattended. "And how long did this pattern span?" Solomon asked. "The entries go back 14 months, Clara said, which is 6 months before Mr. Callahan Sr. died, meaning Blackwell's paid informant was operating on this property while the previous owner was still alive and before any inheritance question arose." The courtroom was very quiet. Judge Marsh was writing something. Clara did not look at Blackwell. She kept her eyes on Solomon, or on the judge, and she kept her voice level and her hands still in her lap, and she said everything she needed to say without a single unnecessary word. When Garrett Cole stood to cross-examine her, he tried 3 different angles. He questioned her qualifications to interpret financial records. She told him about managing her father's farm accounts since she was 16, about the debt negotiation with Dawson and Hargrove, about the specific accounting methodology she had used to cross-reference the ledger entries. He questioned whether she could be certain the payments represented what she claimed. She walked him through the correspondence between payment dates and cattle rotation dates so precisely that he sat down before he finished his 3rd question. She walked back to her seat. James looked at her as she sat down. She could not fully describe the expression on his face. It was not surprise he had stopped being surprised by her some days ago. It was something that had no clean name, something that sat between awe and recognition, and something softer than either. He said nothing. He didn't need to. Solomon was already standing again. Judge Marsh called a recess at 11:30, 45 minutes. In the hallway, Solomon said quietly and without drama, "We're winning." James said nothing. Clara said, "We haven't won yet." "No," Solomon agreed. "But Cole knows it. Watch him when we go back in." They stood in the hallway, and Clara became aware gradually of another presence. She turned. Blackwell was standing 10 feet away. His lawyers were not with him. He was alone, and he was looking at James with an expression that was the most human thing she had seen on his face all morning. James saw him. Neither of them moved for a moment. Then Blackwell said quietly enough that only the 3 of them could hear, "You have your mother's stubbornness." James said, "You have my grandfather's farm." The words landed between them like a stone into deep water. Simple, irreversible. Blackwell looked at him for a long moment. Something moved in his face, not remorse, not quite, but something older and heavier. The expression of a man who has been telling himself a story for a long time and has just in a single sentence heard the true version. He turned and walked back to his lawyers. Clara looked at James. He was watching Blackwell go. His jaw was set. His eyes were steady. She had seen him angry before, the controlled, compressed kind of anger that dangerous people carry quietly. But what was on his face now was different. It was the look of a man who has said the thing that needed saying. Not for effect, because it was true, and truth needed a witness. She put her hand on his arm. Just briefly. Just for a second. He looked down at her hand. Then at her. She took her hand back. They went back inside. The afternoon session lasted 2 hours. Cole made a final argument that was noticeably diminished from his morning confidence. Tighter, more defensive, focused on salvaging what he could from a case whose foundation had been undermined. Solomon responded with the systematic calm of a man dismantling a structure he had studied long enough to know every weak joint. At 3:45, Judge Marsh removed his glasses, set them on his papers, and looked at both tables. "I've heard the arguments and reviewed the submitted evidence," he said. "The petitioner's claim rests on geological surveys conducted on private property without authorization, using access information obtained through a paid informant in violation of the property owner's trust. The surveys are therefore inadmissible as the primary evidence for this claim. Furthermore, the property owner has demonstrated both intent and capacity to develop the resources in question independently, removing the legal basis for an eminent domain argument." He paused. The petition of Blackwell Resource Holdings against Callahan Ridge Ranch is denied. The court further orders that Blackwell Resource Holdings cease all unauthorized geological survey activity on or adjacent to Callahan property. Court is adjourned. The gavel came down. The sound of it moved through Clara's chest like a bell. She sat very still for a moment. Around her, sound was returning to the room. Movement, voices, the scrape of chairs. Solomon was gathering documents with quick, efficient hands. James was still. He was looking at the judge's bench at the space where the gavel had struck. His face was not what she had expected. She had expected relief or satisfaction, or the particular exhale of a man who has been holding his breath for a very long time. What was on his face was grief. Clean, honest grief. The kind that comes when a fight is won, and the person you most wanted to tell is not there to hear it. She understood immediately. His father. She said nothing. She did not offer comfort that wasn't hers to give. She simply stayed still beside him, present and quiet, and let him have the moment. After a time he said very quietly, "He would have liked you." Clara felt something move through her chest that she was not prepared for. She pressed her lips together for a moment before trusting her voice. "I would have liked him," she said. James looked at her. She looked back. In the middle of that loud, emptying courtroom, with Solomon somewhere to the left, and Blackwell's lawyers somewhere to the right, and the whole long wait of the last 30 days sitting between them. James Callahan and Clara Whitmore looked at each other with the specific recognition of two people who have been through something real together and come out the other side, changed. He reached out, took her hand. Not the careful grip of their wedding day. This was different. This was a man who had decided something and was no longer making himself wait. She held his hand. That was all. Just that. It was, she thought, one of the most significant things that had ever happened to her. They didn't speak about it on the ride home. Solomon dozed in the back of the wagon 20 minutes out of the county seat, and the road was long, and the afternoon light was turning gold across the valley as they came down into Callahan Ridge. Neither of them pointed out the moment when the ridge came into view and the ranch spread below them the way it had that first afternoon, the impossible scale of it, the private enormity. But both of them looked at it, and both of them knew what the other was thinking. An hour from home, James said without preamble, "I want to tell you something." Clara waited. "When I met you at the feedlot," he said, "I had already asked 2 other women in this county about the arrangement. Both of them said no within 5 minutes. He kept his eyes on the road. "You asked me for terms." "I remember," she said. "I'd never had anyone ask me for terms," he said. "I'd had people ask me for money, and people ask me for work, and people ask me to be something I wasn't. Nobody had ever just looked at me and started negotiating." "It seemed like the appropriate response," Clara said. "It was," he said. "It was exactly right." He paused. "I told you partly was the answer, when you asked if I married you for strategic reasons." "Yes. The other part," he said, "was that I was lonely." He said the word plainly, not dramatically, not with the hesitance of someone confessing a weakness, just truthfully, the way he said everything when he finally decided to say it. 8,000 acres and a house full of workers, and not one person I could sit at a table with and just be honest. I was lonely, and you walked up and asked me for terms, and I thought, there is someone who deals in reality. There is someone I could actually talk to. Clara held very still. The wagon moved beneath her. The valley was below them, golden in the late light. "You could have just said that," she said. "I didn't know how," he said. Then, she looked at him. At the profile, she had spent a month studying the jaw, the gray eyes, the way he held himself. The man who wore worn clothes over an empire because the empire wasn't the point. The man who paid her family's debt before he asked for anything. The man who sat at a table at 4 in the morning and let himself grieve for his father in front of her because she had stayed still and not tried to fix it. "James," she said. He turned to look at her. "I'm not leaving," she said. He looked at her for a moment. Just looked. Then he faced forward again, and the tension she hadn't fully noticed in his shoulders until now, the held quality, the bracing, released. Not dramatically. Just quietly, The way things settle when the weight has been put down properly at last. I know, he said. I've known for a while. When? She asked. I thought about it. The night you put your hand on the ledger and said, I see you, he said. I was in the hallway. I heard you say it. He glanced at her. You weren't talking to me, but it was the first time in a long time that I felt seen. Clara looked at the road ahead. The ranch was close now. She could see the lights beginning to come on in the main house, May moving in the kitchen window, Danny closing up the stable. Home. I need to tell you something too, she said. All right. I was angry, she said. For a while. About what you didn't tell me before the wedding. About being used as a piece of a strategy. You had every right to be, he said. I know, she said. But I understood it. Not immediately, but eventually. Because I walked into that courthouse making my own calculation. I wasn't a victim of a transaction. I was a participant in one. We both were. And what happened afterward? She paused. That wasn't the transaction. That was something else. James was quiet for a moment. Yes, he said. It was. Solomon stirred in the back of the wagon, and they both stopped talking. And by the time he was fully awake, they were pulling into the ranch yard, and Danny was coming out to take the horses, and May was at the door with the specific expression of a woman who has been waiting for news and is not going to ask directly, but will make it very clear that she expects to be told. James swung down from the wagon, looked up at May. We won, he said. May put her hand flat against the doorframe. Her eyes went wet for exactly 1 second. Then she turned back inside without a word, and the sounds from the kitchen shifted into the specific organized intensity of a woman preparing a celebration meal. Danny whooped once high sharp genuine from the stable. Clara stepped down from the wagon. She stood in the yard of a ranch that had in the last 30 days become hers, in every way that mattered, through work, through sweat, through fear and ledgers and testimony, and the specific exhaustion of fighting hard for something worth fighting for. James was beside her. She said quietly, so only he could hear, Your father built something real. James looked at the house, at the valley beyond it, at the land that ran in all directions further than the eye could track. We'll build something better, he said. He didn't mean it as a promise. He meant it as a fact the way he meant everything he said when he finally said it. Clara believed him. She walked inside to help May with dinner. May made roast chicken and cornbread and a dried apple pie that nobody had asked for, but everyone needed, and the kitchen that night held more noise and warmth than it had since James's father was alive. Danny ate 3 pieces of pie. Henry Briggs came in from the stable and sat at the far end of the table with the quiet satisfaction of a man who had done the right thing and was letting the consequences of that settle peacefully around him. 2 of the other ranch hands drifted in when word spread the way people drift toward light and warmth when something good has happened. Solomon Ware sat in the corner with his jacket off and his glasses pushed up on his forehead, looking like a man who had worked very hard and was now finally allowing himself to rest. Hector Graves was not there. Clara noticed his absence but said nothing. She had expected it. A man who had spent weeks carrying what Hector had carried does not celebrate easily, even when things have come out better than he deserved. She made a mental note to speak to him in the morning. James sat at the head of the table and was quieter than everyone else, which was not unusual, but the quality of his quiet was different tonight. He ate. He listened to the voices around him. He answered when spoken to, but Clara, sitting 2 seats away, could see the thing moving underneath his stillness. Not grief this time, and not the compressed vigilance of someone waiting for the next threat. Something else. Something that had no name yet but was taking up more space in him than he was accustomed to accommodating. He caught her watching him once. She didn't look away. Neither did he for a moment. Then May set the pie on the table, and the room shifted around them, and the moment passed, but what remained of it did not. After dinner, Solomon left for town to make his evening wire to his office. Henry took Danny back to the stable. May chased the remaining hands out with the efficient authority of a woman reclaiming her kitchen. And then the house went quiet, genuinely quiet, the specific silence of a place that has exhaled. Clara was washing the last of the dishes when James came to stand in the kitchen doorway. "You don't have to do that," he said. "I know," she said. "I'm doing it anyway." He came into the kitchen, picked up a cloth, stood beside her and dried what she washed, and for a few minutes they worked in silence, and it was the most domestic thing that had ever happened between them, and also somehow the most honest. "Hector will be at his quarters," James said. "I'll talk to him tomorrow," Clara said. "Not tonight. Tonight he needs to sit with it." "You're not angry at him anymore," she considered. "I was never angry at him the way you might think. I was angry at what his choice created. But Hector made the only decision he could see at the time. Blackwell was very good at making sure that was the only decision people could see." James dried a plate slowly. "I've been thinking about that," he said. "About the workers. About what Blackwell was counting on, that desperation makes people available. That if you leave people in enough need for long enough, someone like him can always find a door open." Clara looked at him sideways. "That sounds like the beginning of a thought." "It is," he said. She waited. "I want to change how we run the pay structure," he said. "Not just wages, proper wages, fair wages, with a portion of the ranch's annual returns distributed to the workers who produce them, and the medical debts." He paused. "Hector's boy is not the only worker on this ranch with debts he can't clear. I should have known that. I should have been looking." Clara set down the last cup, dried her hands, turned to face him. "Your father didn't do it that way," she said carefully. "My father was a good man," James said. "He wasn't a perfect one, and I don't need to repeat every decision he made to honor what he built." He looked at her directly. "You've been here 5 weeks. How many of the workers' families have you talked to?" "All of them," she said. He nodded. He had expected that. "And Danny Ortega's mother is sick in San Antonio, and he sends half his wages home every month, which means he eats poorly and sleeps poorly and works harder than anyone else on this ranch because he's terrified of losing this job." She held his gaze. "Maria Solis in the East Kitchen has been wearing the same shoes for 2 years because she can't afford new ones. Old Pete Garfield has a lung condition. He's never had looked at because the nearest doctor is 2 days away and he can't take the time." She paused. "Should I keep going?" "No," James said quietly. "I get the picture." "It's not about charity," Clara said. "That's not what any of them need. What they need is a structure that doesn't require them to choose between their survival and their loyalty." "Yes," James said. "And a doctor," she said. "Regular, on the property, or close enough to matter." He looked at her. "You've been thinking about this for a while." "Since the 2nd week," she admitted. "Before the hearing." "Yes, before you even knew if we'd still have a ranch to implement any of it on." She met his eyes steadily. "I knew we'd still have the ranch." He looked at her for a long moment, the look that had become familiar to her over 5 weeks, the deep water look that meant he was seeing something he didn't have words for yet. "All right," he said. "Let's build something better." The morning after the hearing, Clara rode out to find Hector Graves before breakfast. She knew where he'd be. She had learned the rhythms of this ranch the way you learn a person not through being told, but through watching long enough that the patterns reveal themselves. Hector on difficult mornings went to the north fence line. It was the furthest point from the main buildings, far enough that voices didn't carry, and he had told her once in passing that he had fixed fence there every week for 15 years, because his hands needed something to do when his head was loud. She found him exactly there. He heard her horse and turned, and when he saw it was her, something in his face went through 3 things very fast: relief, shame, and the particular exhaustion of a man who hasn't slept. She dismounted, stood beside him at the fence without preamble. "You missed dinner last night," she said. "Didn't feel right to celebrate," he said. "I know." She leaned against the fence post. "How's your boy?" Hector blinked. He hadn't expected that. "Better," he said. "The debt's cleared like Mr. Callahan said. He's better." "Good," she said. A silence. The kind that isn't empty. "Mrs. Callahan," Hector said. "What I did has been addressed," she said. Your statement helped win yesterday. That matters. She looked at him directly. I'm not going to stand here and tell you it was nothing because it wasn't. You put this ranch at risk, and you put James at risk, and you put yourself in a position that could have ended very badly for everyone, including your family. That's true. Hector's jaw tightened. He took it without flinching, which she respected. And, she continued, you fixed it when you could. You didn't have to sign that statement. You didn't have to sit in that study and be honest about what you'd done. You chose to. She paused. That choice matters too. Hector looked at the fence line. His hands were on the top rail, and she could see them, the knuckles, the grip. A man holding on. Is there a place for me here? He asked. His voice was stripped of everything except the question. After everything. Clara thought about it. Genuinely thought, which he could see, she wasn't performing consideration, she was actually doing it. James is restructuring the operation, she said. Pay conditions how things are run. He's going to need people who know this land better than they know anything else. She looked at him. That's you. You've been here 15 years. The East Section responds to you in ways it won't respond to anyone else. Callahan Ridge needs you, Hector. The question is whether you're here for Callahan Ridge. Hector turned to look at her fully. His eyes were steady now, the exhausted raw steadiness of a man who has come through something and is standing on the other side of it. Yes, he said. Simple. Total. Then go have breakfast, she said. And fix this fence while you're out here. It's been listing for a week. Something crossed his face that was the closest thing to a smile she had seen on him. He turned back to the fence. She remounted and rode back toward the house. 6 weeks after the hearing, Arthur Webb returned to the ranch. This time he came with 2 colleagues, a surveying team, and a set of preliminary development plans that he and James had been building by correspondence for nearly a month. Clara sat in on every conversation. James had stopped prefacing her presence with explanations, she was simply there, and everyone who came to the ranch adjusted to that fact with varying speeds, but universal finality. The plan they put together was not what Blackwell had wanted. It was not a full extraction operation designed to pull everything out of the ground as fast as commercially viable. It was something more careful, a phased development approach that would take twice as long and generate slower revenue, but would protect the valley's land integrity, maintain the ranch's existing operations, and critically create a worker partnership structure in which the people who lived and worked on Callahan Ridge would receive a share of what came from the ground beneath their feet. Webb's colleague, a man named Forrester, who specialized in ethical resource development, looked at the plan after their first full meeting and said, "This is going to be studied, you know, what you're building here. It's not how things are done." "Good," Clara said. "How things are done hasn't been working well enough." Forrester looked at James. James said nothing, which by now Clara recognized as emphatic agreement. "You're going to have opposition," Forrester said. "Not Blackwell specifically, he's finished in this county, and he knows it. But others like him. When word gets out about the deposit under this valley, there will be others." "There will always be others," Clara said. "That's not a reason to build something weaker. It's a reason to build something stronger." James looked at her across the table. He had been doing that more looking at her, not the way he had in those first days, with the careful assessment of a man evaluating a strategic asset, but with something unguarded. Something that had given up on pretending to be other than what it was. She looked back. Forrester cleared his throat and went back to his papers. The letter from her father came on a Tuesday in October. Thomas Whitmore's handwriting had always been better than you expected from a farmer he had been before the land and the debt, a man who read constantly and took quiet pride in his correspondence. The letter was 3 pages. He described the farm, the fall harvest, the way the East Field had come back stronger than expected after a season of rest. He described carefully and without drama that he had been able to get up without the crutch for the first time last week. He described Doris Pierce stopping by with a pie and asking about Clara and the strange experience of being the father of someone people asked about with a new kind of respect. And then, on the 3rd page, he wrote, "I heard from 3 different people this month about what happened in that courtroom. You should know, Clara, that none of them knew the half of it when they told me, but I knew. I knew because I know you. I spent a long time feeling that I had put you in an impossible position. I am beginning to understand that you were never in an impossible position. You were in exactly the position you were built for. I'm sorry it took me this long to see it. Your mother would have seen it from the beginning." Clara read the letter at the kitchen table. May was in the next room. James was out on the range. She was alone, which was fortunate. She put the letter down. She pressed her hand flat on the page. She allowed herself for exactly 5 minutes to cry. Not from sadness. From the particular overwhelming relief of being seen clearly by someone who loves you, which is, in its way, one of the rarest things in the world. Then she dried her face, folded the letter, put it in the small box she kept in her room beside the first ledger entry she had ever photocopied in her notes, the one with Blackwell's name written in another man's hand. She went back to work. That evening she told James about the letter. Not the emotional parts, those were hers, but the fact of it, the farm doing well, her father walking without the crutch. James listened. Then he said, "We should visit." She looked at him. "The ranch. Zen run for 4 days without us," he said. "Henry's capable. May runs this house better when I'm not in it, if I'm honest." He looked at her steadily. "I'd like to meet your father." Clara held very still for a moment. The image came without invitation. James Callahan at her father's table. Thomas Whitmore, who had built 22 acres with everything he had, sitting across from the man who had saved him without ever meeting him. 2 men who had in their own ways bet everything on Clara. "He'll like you," she said. "You said that before, about my father and you." "I meant it both times," she said. James looked at her with the expression she had no clean name for the one that had been showing up more and more frequently in smaller and smaller moments, as if it had stopped being able to contain itself to large occasions. He reached across the table and covered her hand with his. She turned her hand over and held his back. "Next month," she said. "After the first survey phase is filed." "Next month," he agreed. He didn't move his hand. She didn't move hers. Outside, the valley settled into the particular stillness of a Texas October evening, and the ranch around them breathed with the rhythm of something alive and intact. The news about Blackwell came in November, 3 weeks before their planned visit to her father. Solomon Ware sent the wire. Short, precise characteristic. Blackwell Resource Holdings, dissolved by court order. R. Blackwell, facing investigation for fraudulent survey practices across 4 counties. 3 additional property owners have filed. You are not alone in this. James read it at the breakfast table, passed it to Clara without a word. She read it, set it down. Thought for a moment about the man who had stood in the hallway of the county courthouse and said, "You have your mother's stubbornness to a man he had spent 20 years trying to dismantle, and about what it meant for a story that old to finally end." "He's not going to prison," she said. It wasn't a question. "Probably not," James said. "Men like Blackwell rarely do. But he's finished in this state. His legal exposure is real, and his company is gone, and the reputation he built is done." He paused. "It's not everything." "No," Clara said, "but it's enough." She thought about Thomas Whitmore's grandfather, losing a farm to a young man's opportunism, and Thomas building something new from nothing, and James building something enormous from that inheritance, and Blackwell circling all of it for 40 years, believing that eventually the right people would run out of fight. He had miscalculated. Generation after generation, he had miscalculated. Because he understood land and money and leverage, but he had never understood what it cost people to lose something they loved. He had never understood that cost, because he had never loved anything that way himself. That was his real poverty. "I want to do something," Clara said. James looked at her. "With the first revenue from the development," she said. "Before anything else, I want to set up a fund. For families in this county who are in the position my father was in debt, they can't climb out of land, they're about to lose no mechanism to fight for it." She held his gaze. "Blackwell isn't the last man like him. There will be others, like Forrester said. And most families facing those men don't have what we had. They don't have the time or the knowledge or the—" She stopped. "They don't have someone who asks for terms." James was quiet for a moment. "You want to be that for other people," he said. "I want to build something that can be," she said. Not charity. Something structural. Legal assistance. Financial documentation help. A record-keeping resource so people can see what's being done to them before it's too late. James looked at her for a long time. She watched him working through it, not whether to agree. She could see that he had already agreed, but what it meant. The scope of it. The commitment. That's not a small thing, he said. No, she said. It'll take years to build properly. Yes. And it'll make enemies. People who profit from exactly the situation you're trying to change. James, she said patiently. We already have enemies. At least these ones will be made for a better reason. He almost smiled. The real one, the one that appeared rarely and completely with no performance attached to it. The one she had decided privately was her favorite thing about his face. All right, he said. Just like that, she said. You've been right about everything for 4 months, he said. I've learned to move faster when you have an idea. She felt warmth move through her chest, not at the compliment, but at the ease of it. The way it came out of him naturally now, without the careful measuring of words that had characterized everything he said in those first weeks. He had been learning to open. Slowly and in his own way, and without announcement, but consistently, the way a man learns anything that matters, through repetition and trust, and the accumulated evidence that it's safe. She had been doing the same. They visited her father in November, as planned. Thomas Whitmore was standing in the doorway when they pulled up. Actually standing no crutch, one hand on the frame, more from habit than necessity. He was thinner than Clara remembered, but his eyes were the same. Sharp, warm, the eyes of a man who had not let hardship make him small. He looked at James. James stepped down from the wagon and walked toward the door and held out his hand. Thomas Whitmore looked at the hand for a moment. Then he took it. His grip was strong. Clara had always known it was, but she watched James register it, and something in his face shifted in response. Mr. Whitmore, James said. Mr. Callahan, Thomas said. Then after a beat, I owe you a debt. Clara saved the farm, James said. Not me. Thomas looked past him to where Clara was tying off the horse. Yes, he said. She did. He looked back at James. Come inside. May sent a pie somehow, and I've been waiting 3 days to cut into it. James looked at Clara over his shoulder. She shrugged, because May's logistical capabilities had long since stopped surprising her. James turned back to her father. She's competent, he said. Thomas Whitmore laughed a real laugh surprised out of him. Come inside, he said again. They stayed 3 days. Clara watched her father and her husband in the same room and felt something settle inside her that she hadn't known was unsettled. Thomas asked James questions about the ranch. Real questions, technical questions. The questions of a man who knew land and wanted to understand how someone else knew it. James answered with the directness she had come to love and asked questions back and listened to the answers with his full attention in the way he gave everything his full attention. On the second evening, she walked in from the kitchen to find them sitting in her father's small parlor, both of them with their elbows on their knees, talking in low voices about something she couldn't quite hear. She stood in the doorway for a moment without announcing herself. Thomas was telling a story. She could see it in his face, something from a long time ago, something about her mother. And James was listening, the way he listened to things that mattered completely, with no part of his attention anywhere else. She backed up quietly and went back to the kitchen. She stood at the counter and felt something she didn't have a word for, something that was too big and too quiet to be simply happiness, something that lived in the overlap between what had been and what was now and what was coming. She pressed both hands flat on the counter the way she pressed them flat on ledger pages when she was steadying herself for what was inside. She was 23 years old. She had walked into a courthouse with nothing and walked out with everything she hadn't known she needed. She had found an empire in a man with worn-out boots. She had faced down a predator 4 years in the making. She had built alliances and dismantled schemes and testified in front of a circuit judge and held a man's hand in a courtroom in a county seat while a gavel changed the shape of their future. She had found something that was not the sacrifice she had expected, something real, something that asked of her everything she actually had. She thought about the morning she had walked up to a stranger at a fence rail and asked him for terms. She thought about how she had believed completely that she was making the only choice available to a woman with no options. She had been wrong. She had not been out of options. She had been exactly at the beginning. They drove home in early December, the valley coming into view as the light dropped gold across the ridge, and Clara watched Callahan Ridge unfold below her the same way it had that first afternoon and felt it entirely differently. That first day, she had felt the shock of impossible scale. The vertigo of discovering that the world she had agreed to was nothing like the world she had been shown. Now she felt it the way you feel a place that belongs to you, not owned, not controlled, but known. The way you feel something that has been through things with you and is still standing. James pulled the wagon to a stop at the top of the ridge. He did not need to. The horses knew the road home, and he could have kept moving. He stopped because this was where you stopped, because this was the view that asked to be looked at, and because 5 months into their marriage, he had started doing things not because they were strategically necessary, but because they were right. They sat at the top of the ridge together and looked at the valley below them. Lights were coming on in the workers' quarters. Smoke from May's kitchen. The cattle distant and slow in the far fields. All of it exactly as it had been for 30 years, and because of the last 5 months, entirely different. "I've been thinking," Clara said. "I know," James said. "You have a specific look." "What look?" "The one where you're about to tell me something is going to require significant effort, and you're already certain it's worth it." She turned to look at him. He was looking at the valley, but his mouth had the specific configuration of a man suppressing a smile. She had catalogued that configuration. She was very fond of it. "Arthur Webb's first full survey report comes in January," she said. "When it does, we'll have the documentation to start the phased development filing. Solomon thinks we can have the first operational permits by spring." "Yes," James said. "And I've been talking to a lawyer in San Antonio about the fund structure. She specializes in property rights law, and she's willing to consult on the organizational framework." "Good," James said. "And I wrote to 3 other ranching families in the county about a cooperative documentation initiative sharing land records and boundary histories so that what happened here can't happen to any of them without a much longer fight." "Clara," James said. She stopped. He turned from the valley and looked at her directly. The last light was behind him, and his face was in partial shadow, and she could see clearly the expression that had no name, the one she had been watching grow from a flicker into something that took up the whole of his face when he wasn't working to contain it. "I love you," he said. The words came out in exactly the way he said everything that mattered. Plainly. Without decoration. The way you state a fact that has been true long enough that not saying it has become its own kind of dishonesty. Clara looked at him. She thought about the fence rail where they had negotiated, the courthouse where they had stood without flowers, the ridge where she had first seen the valley and felt the ground shift under everything she thought she understood, the kitchen table at 4 in the morning, the courtroom, his hand covering hers, the letter from her father. 3 days in a small parlor, watching 2 men who both carried their love for land and family, the same careful private way, learn to speak to each other. She thought about what she had told him in the wagon on the way home from the hearing. "I'm not leaving." And what he had said back. "I know. I've known for a while." She had known too. For a while. "I know," she said. He looked at her. "I love you too," she said. "I've known for a while." Something crossed his face that she had never seen there before. Not the almost smile, not the careful steadiness, not the deep water look. Something younger. Something that she realized had probably been there all along, under everything else, under the worn coat and the strategic silences and the 8,000 acres of deliberate misdirection. He reached out. His hand came up to the side of her face, and she leaned into it slightly, the way you lean into something warm when you've been cold for longer than you realized. "We should go home," he said. "Yes," she said. He clicked the horses forward. The wagon moved down the ridge toward the valley, toward the lights, toward May's kitchen, and Henry Briggs and Danny Ortega and Hector Graves fixing fence lines, and the workers whose wages were going to change in January, and the legal fund that didn't exist yet, and the cooperative that was just 3 letters, and the geological survey that would come spring, begin converting the land beneath their feet into something that would outlast both of them. Toward all of it. Toward home. Years later, people in that part of Texas would talk about Callahan Ridge, the way people talk about things that became more than what they started as. They talked about the worker partnership that made headlines in the San Antonio paper in 1890. About the legal assistance fund that had by 1893 helped 11 families keep land they would otherwise have lost. About the cooperative boundary documentation initiative that Clara Callahan built from 3 letters into a county-wide network that became a model referenced in land rights arguments 2 states over. They talked about the man who had dressed like a drifter and hidden one of the greatest ranches in the state because he had learned young and hard that power is safest when it's underestimated. And about the woman who had walked into that power with nothing but clear eyes and the ability to read a ledger and the willingness to ask for terms, and had changed everything about how that power was used. They talked about the hearing. They talked about the testimony. They talked about the way Richard Blackwell had walked out of that courthouse a finished man, and how he had never quite understood what had finished him. Not the surveys, not the legal arguments, not even Hector's statement. What had finished him was the thing he had never bothered to assess. The woman he had looked at and dismissed in under 3 seconds because she was young and new, and arrived in a beaten wagon beside a man in worn boots. That was his real mistake. Not the surveys, not the petition, not the paid informant, or the manufactured deadlines, or the 4 years of patient scheming. The mistake was the 3 seconds he had spent deciding she was not worth his attention. Clara Callahan had spent those same 3 seconds deciding everything she needed to know about him. Thomas Whitmore in Willow Creek walked without a crutch for the rest of his life and told anyone who would listen that his daughter had married better than she knew, which made Clara every time she heard it both fond and privately amused, because she was quite certain she had known exactly what she was doing. Not in the details, not in the ranch or the minerals or the hidden empire or the man underneath the worn coat, but in the decision itself. In the willingness to walk towards something unknown and claim it rather than wait in a known place for the ground to give way. She had always known that part. James Callahan, for his part, wore the same quality of plain working clothes for the rest of his life. He had the money to dress otherwise. He did not want to. Clara had stopped trying to explain this to visitors years ago. What she said when asked was that her husband knew the difference between what a man wore and what a man was, and had decided long ago that conflating the two was a mistake other people were welcome to make. They made it useful when they needed to. He continued to drive a plain wagon into Willow Creek once a year, and once a year, the same people who had watched Clara Whitmore climb into that wagon with her single trunk and her sacrifice expression saw them return together, equal in the specific way that people are equal when they have been through things that matter and come out the other side, still choosing each other. Doris Pierce, who had told Clara about a poor drifter looking for a wife on a summer afternoon in 1887, lived long enough to see the Callahan Ridge Cooperative referenced in a state legislature debate about property rights in 1895, and reportedly told the entire dry goods store about it for 3 consecutive days. May ran the kitchen at Callahan Ridge for 22 more years and trained 6 women who went on to run households of their own. She never stopped telling Clara what she was doing wrong, and Clara never stopped doing things her own way, regardless, and this arrangement suited them both perfectly. Henry Briggs retired at 71 and was given a small house on the north end of the property within walking distance of the stable because he could no more stop watching horses than he could stop breathing. Danny Ortega became the head of ranch operations by 1895 and sent enough money home that his mother moved from San Antonio to a house in the valley where she grew a garden that became quietly one of the most remarkable things on the entire property. Hector Graves rebuilt himself the way a man rebuilds who is not starting from nothing but from the right place. Slowly, correctly, with the specific care of someone who knows the cost of cutting corners. He became in time the person newer workers came to when they needed to understand how a ranch ran, not just the logistics, but the ethic of it, the loyalty, what it meant to be part of something that was trying to be worth being part of. He never talked about 1887 directly. But once near the end of a long day, fixing the east fence line, he told a young hand beside him that the most important decision he had ever made was a statement he had signed in a study at 5 in the afternoon with his hands shaking, because someone had trusted him with a choice when he expected punishment instead. The young hand didn't fully understand what he meant. He would later. And Clara Callahan, who had walked into a courthouse at 23 years old, believing she was sacrificing her future, who had discovered an empire and uncovered a conspiracy, and loved a man who kept his whole self in a locked box, and learned patiently and with tremendous personal effort to open it, looked back on that summer from the distance of years, and felt not the tragedy of what she had almost lost, but the astonishment of what she had found. Not the ranch, not the minerals, or the legal fund, or the cooperative, or the things that had her name in newspaper columns and legal precedents. What she had found was simpler and larger than any of those things. She had found that the life worth living is not the one that avoids risk, but the one that meets it with clear eyes and open hands. That strength is not the absence of need, but the willingness to act in the presence of it. That love, real love, the kind that holds through a courtroom and a harvest and a hard winter and an honest argument and the slow accumulation of ordinary mornings, is not something that happens to you. It is something you build, one ledger entry at a time, one honest conversation at a time, one hand held across a table in a lamplit kitchen at the end of a very long day. She had walked into that courthouse to escape poverty. She had walked out into the greatest work of her life, and she had built every inch of it herself alongside a man who had the wisdom finally to let her. That was the whole story. That was enough.